The news of Joe Miller's passing hit the protagonist like a hammer, not just because of the grief, but because of what it meant for their future. Joe had been a steadfast pillar of the community, a man whose life was entwined with the land he cultivated for decades. His 200-acre farm was more than just soil and crops. It was a testament to hard work, perseverance, and a deep respect for nature. When the protagonist received word that they had inherited the land, they felt a mixture of emotions: honor, responsibility, and an undeniable pressure to live up to their grandfather's legacy. They remembered the summers spent as a child running through the tall grass, watching their grandfather work tirelessly under the scorching sun, his hands calloused yet gentle as he tended to his fields. The thought of owning such a vast expanse of land was overwhelming, but there was also a quiet excitement, a sense of purpose that whispered of new beginnings. They envisioned restoring the farm, perhaps even modernizing it to make it more sustainable. But that dream was shattered the moment they drove to the property and saw something that should not have been there: construction crews, bulldozers, and partially built houses standing where the grandfather's fields used to stretch endlessly toward the horseshock coursed through the protagonist's veins as they pulled onto the dirt road leading to what should have been untouched farmland. Instead, they found a bustling construction site teeming with workers in hard hats, the air filled with a mechanical hum of heavy machinery and the sharp clang of metal against metal. The protagonist's heart pounded as they stepped out of their vehicle, their boots crunching against the gravel. A large sign near the entrance read, "Sunny Pines, Luxury Living in a Beautiful Community." Beneath it, a smaller sign announced the upcoming completion of 96 exclusive homes. How was this possible? This was their land that had been in their family for generations. They stormed toward the nearest supervisor, demanding an explanation, only to be met with blank stares and shrugged shoulders. No one seemed to know, or care, who originally owned the land. Frustration boiling over, the protagonist drove straight to the county records office, digging through paperwork and deeds, determined to uncover the truth. Their pulse quickened as they found the documents detailing their inheritance, confirming beyond a doubt that the land rightfully belonged to them. But as they continued searching, something even more troubling surfaced: a series of property records from 1997 that showed a suspicious alteration in the boundary lines, an 80-acre discrepancy that could not be ignored. Fueled by anger and confusion, the protagonists sought out their grandfather's original property surveys, certain that the truth lay within those carefully marked maps and notes. After hours of searching through dusty file boxes stored in Joe Miller's old farmhouse, they found them, aged but intact, detailed maps that outlined every inch of the 200 acres. Comparing these to the altered county records, the fraud was glaringly obvious. Someone had tampered with the official property lines, systematically cutting out a significant portion of the land and reallocating it under a different name. But who? And why? As the protagonist dug deeper, they unearthed unsettling details about Sunny Pines Homeowners Association and its president, Diane Reynolds. A woman known for her aggressive land acquisitions and relentless pressure on smaller landowners to sell, Diane had a history of questionable dealings. It was clear that this wasn't just a clerical error, it was a deliberate act of theft. Armed with undeniable proof, the protagonist wasted no time in taking action. Their first move was to contact an attorney, Mr. Wallace, a seasoned expert in property law. Together, they filed for an emergency injunction to halt construction immediately. Within days, the court order was issued, and the once busy construction site ground to a halt, leaving an uneasy silence hanging over the contested land. The emergency injunction may have stopped construction, but it also painted a massive target on the protagonist's back. Diane Reynolds was not a woman who took challenges lightly. As the head of the Sunny Pines HOA, she wielded significant influence over local officials, business owners, and even law enforcement. She had built her empire on intimidation and manipulation, ensuring that anyone who opposed her found themselves entangled in bureaucratic nightmares or facing sudden financial troubles. The protagonist quickly learned just how far she was willing to go. Within days, their electricity was mysteriously cut off, followed by their water supply. When they tried to access their land, they found their driveway blocked by illegally parked HOA vehicles. Notices began arriving in the mail, fines for non-existent violations, legal threats warning of countersuits, even anonymous letters warning them to back down. But the most disturbing event came one night when they awoke to the sound of footsteps outside their farmhouse. Peering through the window, they caught the shadowy figures of men in dark clothing tampering with their fence, driving stakes into the ground as if trying to move the boundary lines under cover of darkness. The message was clear: back off, or face the consequences. But the protagonist was not one to be bullied. If anything, These acts of aggression only strengthened their resolve. Realizing they couldn't fight this battle alone, the protagonists decided to take a different approach: unite those who had also suffered under the HOA's iron grip. They began speaking with other homeowners, listening to their grievances, and soon discovered that they were not the only ones who had been victimized. Many residents had been pressured into selling their properties at unfair prices, burdened with excessive fines, or even threatened with legal action for minor infractions. Some, like Gerald, the HOA's treasurer, had grown disillusioned with the corruption within the organization. It was Gerald who provided one of the most damning pieces of evidence: financial records showing years of embezzlement, with large sums of money unaccounted for. With this knowledge, the protagonist formed the Meadowcreek Homeowners Coalition, a grassroots movement aimed at taking down the HOA's corrupt leadership and reclaiming their community. The coalition quickly gained traction, drawing support from residents eager for change. Meetings were held in living rooms and barns, plans were made, and legal strategies were discussed. What had started as one person's fight for justice had now grown into a full-fledged movement, one that would challenge not only Diane Reynolds but the entire power structure that had allowed her corruption to flourish. As the Meadowcreek Homeowners Coalition grew in numbers and determination, the tension between the residents and the HOA escalated. Diane Reynolds, recognizing the growing threat, ramped up her efforts to maintain control. Mysterious citations and fines began appearing in homeowners' mailboxes, some for absurd infractions like improperly colored mailboxes or grass exceeding the approved height by an inch. Residents who attended coalition meetings found themselves targeted. Some even reported damage to their properties, slashed tires, and anonymous threats. The protagonist, as the face of the resistance, bore the brunt of Diane's wrath. One morning, they woke up to find red spray paint scrawled across their barn doors: "Get out." It was a crude but clear message. But instead of being frightened, the protagonist felt something shift inside them. This wasn't just about their land anymore. It was about fighting for the people who had been bullied and manipulated for years. That day, they made a decision. They would not rest until Diane Reynolds and her corrupt HOA were held accountable for their actions. They doubled down on their efforts, organizing a town hall meeting where residents could publicly share their grievances. The turnout was larger than expected. Dozens of homeowners stood up, one after another, recounting their experiences with the HOA's fraudulent fines, intimidation tactics, and shady financial practices. The event marked a turning point. The once untouchable HOA was now under intense scrutiny, and for the first time, Diane Reynolds looked rattled. As the legal battle intensified, the protagonist stumbled upon yet another shocking revelation, one that could change the course of the fight entirely. While researching property records and county zoning laws, they discovered that a portion of their grandfather's land had been designated as protected wetlands decades ago. This meant that not only had the HOA illegally acquired the land, but they were also violating federal and state environmental laws by developing it. Determined to prove their case, the protagonist contacted an environmental specialist, who confirmed their suspicions. The wetlands were home to several endangered species, and any further construction on the land would constitute a serious violation. With this new information in hand, the protagonist and their attorney, Mr. Wallace, filed additional legal motions, this time citing environmental regulations. If proven in court, these violations wouldn't just stop construction, they could lead to severe financial penalties and even criminal charges for those involved. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. The HOA, once a formidable force, now found itself facing legal challenges on multiple fronts. Diane Reynolds, who had always exuded an air of confidence and control, was visibly shaken. She knew that if the environmental violations held up in court, it wouldn't just mean the end of the development, it could mean the end of her reign. While the environmental case was making waves, another bombshell dropped that threatened to dismantle the HOA from within. Gerald, the disillusioned treasurer, had been quietly compiling evidence of financial misconduct for months. He finally came forward with a detailed report exposing years of embezzlement and mismanagement. According to the records, large sums of money had been siphoned from HOA funds into private accounts linked to Diane Reynolds and a handful of her associates. Homeowners' dues, meant for community maintenance and improvements, had instead been funneled into luxury vacations, personal real estate ventures, and undisclosed consulting fees. Gerald handed over every document he had to the protagonist and Mr. Wallace, who immediately forwarded the evidence to law enforcement. Within days, local authorities launched a formal investigation. The press got wind of the story, and news outlets began reporting on the corruption scandal unfolding in Sunny Pines. Suddenly, Diane's powerful connections weren't enough to shield her from the consequences. Residents who had once been too afraid to speak out now came forward with their own stories of extortion and deceit. Diane, who had ruled through intimidation for so long, found herself cornered. The walls were closing in, and for the first time, she had nowhere to hide. The final blow came when the police, backed by financial crime investigators, arrived at the HOA office with warrants in hand. Diane Reynolds was arrested on multiple charges, including fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit property theft. The once powerful president of the Sunny Pines HOA was led away in handcuffs, her face a mask of disbelief as reporters swarmed the scene. Alongside her, several other key figures within the HOA were also taken into custody, including the legal counsel who had helped orchestrate the fraudulent land transfers. With the HOA's leadership dismantled, the court case proceeded swiftly. The judge ruled in favor of the protagonist, affirming that the altered property lines were fraudulent and restoring the original boundaries. The ruling not only nullified the HOA's claim to the 80 acres but also mandated that all ongoing construction be permanently halted. Homeowners who had purchased properties within the disputed area were initially devastated, fearing they had lost everything. However, the protagonist, understanding the human impact of the situation, worked with local officials to create a property exchange program that would provide fair alternatives for those affected. No one would be left without options. The resolution brought relief to the community, and for the first time in years, the people of Sunny Pines felt free from the oppressive grip of the HOA. With Diane Reynolds and her corrupt allies removed from power, the residents of Sunny Pines saw an opportunity to rebuild, not just their properties, but their sense of community. The Meadowcreek Homeowners Coalition evolved into the Meadowcreek Community Association, a transparent, resident-led organization dedicated to fairness, sustainability, and accountability. Unlike the previous HOA, the new association operated with clear bylaws, ensuring that decisions were made with input from the community rather than dictated by a select few. The protagonist, having fought so hard to protect their grandfather's legacy, now found themselves in a position of leadership, guiding the community toward a future built on trust and cooperation. They also took steps to preserve the protected wetlands, working with environmental organizations to ensure that the land remained untouched. In the end, what had begun as a bitter legal battle transformed into something greater, a movement that restored integrity, justice, and a renewed sense of belonging to a town that had long suffered under corruption. As the sun set over the fields that once belonged to Joe Miller, the protagonist stood at the edge of the land, taking in the sight of their home, now safe and secure. They had won, not just for themselves, but for everyone who had been wronged. Their grandfather's legacy was no longer just a memory. It was a thriving, living part of the community's future. Healing the divided community. Even after the legal battle was won and the corrupt leadership of the HOA was dismantled, the wounds left behind did not heal overnight. The community was still fractured, with some homeowners feeling betrayed by the lies they had been sold and others angry at how close they had come to losing everything. The protagonist knew that winning the lawsuit was only the first step. The real challenge was in repairing the trust that had been broken. They organized town hall meetings, not just to discuss logistics but to allow residents to voice their frustrations, fears, and hopes for the future. Some people still resented the protagonist, believing that by stopping the development, they had disrupted plans that homeowners had invested their life savings into. Others, however, saw the victory as a chance to reclaim their autonomy, to build a community that worked for everyone rather than being ruled by a single powerful entity. Slowly, as the protagonist continued to engage with the residents, tensions eased. They listened, they compromised, and they reassured those who had lost investments that the property exchange program would ensure they weren't left without options. More than just rebuilding homes, they were rebuilding relationships, proving that their fight had never been about personal gain but about justice for all. The legacy of Joe Miller. Amid the rebuilding efforts, the protagonist took a step back to reflect on the deeper meaning of their journey. Their grandfather, Joe Miller, had been more than just a farmer. He had been a protector of the land, a man who believed in fairness and hard work. As a child, the protagonist had often watched him stand on the porch, surveying the land with quiet pride, knowing that every inch of soil had been earned through years of labor and love. The protagonist realized that their fight had been more than just a legal battle. It had been about preserving that legacy, about honoring the values that their grandfather had lived by. To ensure that his memory would never be erased, they proposed the creation of the Miller Conservation Reserve, a portion of the land that would remain untouched, protected for future generations. The community, now united, supported the idea, and soon, plans were in motion to designate the wetlands and surrounding areas as a nature preserve. Walking through those fields once again, the protagonist felt a deep sense of peace. They had not only reclaimed the land but had secured its future, ensuring that no one could ever take it away again. The final confrontation with Diane Reynolds. Despite her downfall, Diane Reynolds was not one to disappear quietly. Even after her arrest, she fought tooth and nail to avoid prosecution, hiring high-profile lawyers and attempting to spin the narrative in her favor. Rumors spread that she was trying to negotiate a deal, claiming she had only been following the advice of county officials and was unaware of the fraudulent land deals. But the evidence against her was overwhelming. Bank records, fraudulent contracts, and multiple testimonies from former HOA board members painted a clear picture of her long-running corruption. The protagonist, having spent months fighting her influence, was given the opportunity to confront her one last time at the final court hearing. Sitting across from her in the courtroom, they saw not the powerful, untouchable woman who had once controlled an entire community, but a person unraveling under the weight of her own greed. When the judge handed down the sentence, several years in prison for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy, it was not a moment of triumph, but of closure. Diane's reign had ended, and with it, the community could finally move forward, free from her manipulation. The transformation of Sunny Pines. With the corrupt HOA leadership dismantled and a new community-led association in place, Sunny Pines began to transform. Gone were the arbitrary fines, the intimidation tactics, and the oppressive rules that had turned neighbors against one another. In their place was a system based on transparency, fairness, and cooperation. The Meadowcreek Community Association operated differently from the old HOA. It was run by elected residents, with open meetings where everyone had a voice. Homeowners, once wary of leadership, now actively participated in decision-making, ensuring that power was never concentrated in the hands of a few. The protagonist, though instrumental in the changes, chose not to take an official leadership role. Instead, they focused on ensuring that the land was properly managed, that the property exchange program was executed fairly, and that the conservation efforts were upheld. Walking through the town, they could see the difference: the smiles on people's faces, the restored trust among neighbors, and the renewed sense of pride in their homes. What had once been a battleground was now a thriving, united community. As the seasons changed, so did the protagonist's perspective on what home truly meant. They had inherited land, but they had also inherited a responsibility, a duty to protect not just property lines, but the spirit of the community. The fight had been long and exhausting, but standing at the edge of their grandfather's land, they felt something they hadn't in a long time: peace. They no longer saw themselves as just the inheritor of Joe Miller's farm, but as its caretaker, its guardian. They had fought for it, bled for it, and ultimately saved it, not just for themselves, but for everyone who called it home. Looking out over the fields, where wildflowers now grew alongside restored wetlands, they realized that this was more than just the end of a battle.